All right. So let's continue on. Were there any other questions? We're going to go back to nomenclature. And for nomenclature, I was going to go through some examples, but we need to do some more memorization for the ion. We're going to talk about acid anions and acid mix. Do you know what the hydrogen ion is called? This is a hydrogen ion. Or the hydrogen cation. Or it's called the proton. It's called the proton because in H1, when it loses an electron, it's just the proton left over. Or an acidic hydrogen. In other words, when we think about hydrogen ion, we think acid. Hydrogen ion is acid. And so we have a series of things. What is this called? Actually, phosphate. What is phosphate? How many oxygens does phosphate have? 4. Yeah. That's good. And what is the charge on phosphate? Maybe we got to look at the periodic table. 3 minus? 3 minus is correct. Good. Actually, so phosphate's this. Now, we have different phosphate derivatives. These you don't have to memorize because if we take a hydrogen ion plus the phosphate, you know what we make? We make this. We make HPO4, but the charge has changed. What is the net charge going to be?
2 negative.
2 negative. And then we're going to call this as hydrogen phosphate. But there's a problem with that because if we take 2 H pluses and a phosphate, we'll make this H2PO4. The charge on that will be minus. And then if we take 3 of these onto a phosphate, then we make this H3PO4. All right, so here we have our basic phosphate, and this would be what we call an acid anion. Both of these are acid anions. This is acid anion. And then this would be called an acid. It has, we aren't going to add another H plus to that. And so the first one's going to be called monohydrogen. That's one word, monohydrogen phosphate. And the second one is going to be called dihydrogen phosphate. But this last one is not called trihydrogen phosphate. The last one is called phosphoric acid.
Professor, so if it's an acid, does it have a charge?
There's no charge because the 3 positive charges balance out the 3 negative charges. And so the difference between an acid anion and an acid is there's no charge. And we aren't going to go the opposite direction. We aren't going to make this positive. We'll stop here. And so that's phosphate. Tell me what sulfate is. SO4 2 minus. Good. And so this is sulfate. And then what do you think this is called? HSO4 with a charge of, what would the charge be? Minus 1. HSO4 minus 1, what do you think this is called? Okay, this one's not called monohydrogen. This one's just called hydrogen sulfate. Why is that? The reason is if you go to dihydrogen sulfate, we don't call this dihydrogen sulfate. Do you know what we call this? This is called sulfuric acid. And so if there's only one acid anion, then we drop the prefix. If there are multiple acid anions, we have the prefix. Since there's only one here, it's just hydrogen sulfate. Hydrogen sulfate goes by an old name. The old name for this is bisulfate. Actually, it's not that old because a lot of people still call it bisulfate. So that's bisulfate. Hey, tell me what carbonate is. What's the formula for carbonate?
Where does the bi come from?
The bi is this historical. No, it doesn't mean two in this case. It has a different origin. It has an origin in, I think, chemical reactivity. But let's take a look at carbonate. What is carbonate? Okay, you might have noticed this. Did you see the pattern? The ITE and the ATE, these are called oxy anions, where the IDE is not an oxyanion. And so when we have an IDE, it typically doesn't contain oxygen. When we have an ITE and an ATE, it contains oxygen. It's a difference. And so carbonate is going to have oxygen. And therefore, what is this called? HCO3. What's the charge on that? So I take an H plus, add it to this, and we get HCO3 minus 1, and it's called hydrogen space carbonate, or what's another name for this? No, not carbonic acid. Bicarbonate. This is the bicarbonate. So sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda, I think. Baking powder, one of those.
Where does the bi come from?
That is a good question that I don't know the answer to. I have no idea where the bi comes from.
Professor, for the carbonate, is it a 2 minus charge because carbon is 4 and then oxygen is 2 minus?
Yep. That's the reason why. Where does the bi in bicarbonate come from? And it comes from whoever, the prefix bi, let's see what this says. The prefix bi in bicarbonate comes from an outdated naming system and is based on the observation that there is twice as much carbonate per sodium ion in sodium bicarbonate and other bicarbonates than in sodium carbonate and other carbonates. Oh, so I guess it is 2. But it's 2 based on chemical reactivity, not 2 based on the number of atoms or ions. All right, then if we want to dihydrogen carbonate, we don't call this dihydrogen carbonate. Do you know what we call that? This is called carbonic acid. And so the name for acid anions is simple. You just add hydrogen or monohydrogen or dihydrogen, depending on this. Now, how do we name acids? And naming acids is very simple too. And so let's talk about the acid name next. So, acids. Acids all have the same, what we say, cation. The only difference is they have different anions. Same cation, hydrogen, different anion. Therefore, the acid name is going to be based on the anion name. So acid name is based on anion. We only have 3 types of anions. What are the 3 types of anions? The 3 types of anions are the anions that end in IDE, the anions that end in ATE, and the anions that end in ITE. There are only 3 types of anions. And therefore, there are 3 types of acid names. And so, if the anion ends in IDE, then the acid is named like this. The acid is going to be hydro, would be the prefix, and ic acid would be the suffix there. And so, let's do an example here. The anion Cl minus is, would give us the acid HCl, which is called hydro It's a chloride, so it's going to be hydrochloric acid. Let's pick an 8. Well, if we have an 8, then what we're going to do is we're just going to change the ending only. We're not going to add a prefix, so it's just going to be ic acid. And so let's take another 8. What's another 8? Give me another 8. How about this one? Do you know what nitrate is? What's the formula for nitrate? NO3 negative, good. And therefore nitric acid would be HNO3, and what would that, oh, actually I just told you it is. We would take nitrate and then change the ending. So now it's nitric acid. Okay, give me an ite. Nitrite, let's try nitrite. Nitrite would be NO2 minus. So HNO2, okay, what do? We just change it to the ous acid ending. And so we're going to have ous acid, ic acid, and hydroic acid, depending on if we have I, ate, or ite. And so this one's going to just be called nitrous acid. And that's pretty much it. Although your book is going to have more. Your book is going to have more because it subdivides it. But we don't need subdivision. So let's try 2 examples in which your book tries to come up with additional categories. Your book loves additional categories. So I'm going to do this. Name this acid, HClO4. Let's name this acid. Well, the first thing is that acid consists of the same cation. It's the H plus cation, and the anion is going to be ClO4 negative. And so what is the name of the anion? The name of this anion is not chlorate. Not chloride. Perchlorate. The name of this is perchlorate. Chlorate is ClO3 minus, so perchlorate ClO4 minus. And therefore the acid is going to be called, well, it's an 8. So if it's an 8, we just change it to ic acid. So this is going to be called perchloric acid. Perchloric acid. That's it. Let's do another example here. So we're out. This will be our last example. HClO. The anion here is ClO minus, which we call, okay, chlorate is ClO3, which means ClO2 is chlorite, which means ClO is hypochlorite. Hypo meaning less, hypochlorite. And therefore, it's an ite. What do we do with an ite? Ous acid. So this is going to be called hypochlorous acid. And so those are some examples. And what you want to do is you want to start, the memorization. It sounds like you guys are already making good progress with the memorization for the ions. So that's good. I do. I took it. Ask me tomorrow. I'll give it back to you.
Also, did you get back the test?
No, I'm not sure.
I missed the lab day for experiment 3, and I kept meaning to talk to you about it, but last week I had to keep leaving and going to San Pedro to fix my car. Is there any day I can make that up?
Experiment 3 is going to be a hard one.
That's
to
the
make
partner
up.
one. I know, like.
Check with the stockroom and see if another class is doing it, and
Okay.
if it's possible to squeeze in if they
Alright.
have room. But ask the stockroom that you missed experiment 3. Are there any other instructors doing it? And then we can go from there.
Okay. Thank you.